Hello, my name is Belagar. I'm the head developer for Wainriders, a submod for the Dauntless Days, taking the action back to the year 1851 of the Third Age, about 1,200 years before the events of the Lord of the Rings and the War of the Ring. Today we'll be looking at one of the unique factions of the mod, the Kingdom of Rhovanion. Now, that name might not be immediately familiar to you, but these people who lived west of the Sea of Rhûn, when they were driven out of their homes, they settled in the Anduin Vale, became the Eotheod, and then eventually the Rohirrim. So, they might not be famous, but their descendants very much are. Now, like the Rohirrim, Rhovanion is a cavalry-based faction. It's very heavily based around cavalry. The aesthetic is slightly different, however. Instead of a late Germanic Anglo-Saxon feel, the faction is more inspired by migration-era Germanic and Slavic tribes. There's very heavy Slavic influence in the aesthetics of this faction, but in terms of playstyle, it will be quite familiar to those who like to play Rohan in the Dauntless Days. It's a very cavalry-heavy faction. So first, taking a look at your general's bodyguard, you have the Prince's Druzhina. This is one of the few cavalry bodyguards available in the mod. Most factions do not have access to cavalry generals, and this is, again, because you are a cavalry-focused faction. You are probably the most formidable cavalry force in the mod, so it is fitting that your general's bodyguard is a cavalry unit. In this case, it is a hybrid. It's armed with a spear, it's got a shield on its back, it's got a nomadic composite bow, which you can't see because of Attila's terrible lighting, unfortunately. Or rather, very good lighting, but very bleak, very dark themed, which I suppose is fitting. It has a range of 150 meters with 20 ammunition. I believe its damage is 44 with those missiles, and it is very capable against other cavalry in melee. Again, because of that anti-cavalry bonus, its armor is 55. It's a very capable unit of cavalry, though you definitely want to use up the ammunition before you go into melee. You will lose against sort of elite shock cavalry like the Swan Knights for Gondor, for example, if you just throw them into melee without shooting at anybody at all. So it's not a pure melee cav unit, it's definitely a hybrid. Going back and looking at your tier 1, you start at tier 1 with Bog Hunters. Bog Hunters are your basic archer, but they are definitely better than the basic archers of other factions. For starters, most factions, their accuracy ranges from 0 to 2 at their beginning level archers, if they have them at all. The Bog Hunters start out with 7. Typical beginning game archers have 150 to 165 range. These have 190 with their longbows. So these are extremely formidable early game archers with very high damage, very low armor, and very poor melee stats, as you can see. Just absolutely terrible if they get engaged by virtually anything in melee, but just extremely proficient at ranged combat, and very, very valuable for their price. You can mass these guys up, do tons of damage. They're a great unit, fantastic unit. Looking at your tier 1 infantry, you have the Select Freemen. The Select Freemen are armed with precursor javelins. They're armed with spears and shields, 25% missile block chance with 20 armor, fairly mediocre morale. This is not a unit that's particularly high morale. These are people who have been levied into the army. They are not professional soldiers. They will not stick around if the battle starts going poorly for you. However, the precursor javelins and the anti-cavalry bonus is very useful. It's just a very solid low-end unit. Don't expect too much of them, but they can be very proficient killing cavalry and holding your front line. Looking at your tier 1 skirmisher, you have the Kelduin Fishermen. These are armed with a heavy 50 damage javelin, which is all armor piercing. It's a heavy javelin. And then, in addition to that, once in melee, they're armed with two-handed spears. Again, sort of going for a fisherman theme, the idea that these people are going to be using spears to kill fish in the Kelduin River, and then they're going to be using those same implements on the battlefield. Very poorly armored, no shields, so very vulnerable to missiles, very vulnerable to infantry, but the two-handed spear and the high-damage javelins mean that it's going to be very good at supporting your cavalry and dealing with enemy cavalry. These guys are very good at also at killing trolls, killing sort of monster entity type units because of their javelins. Just very, very, very good early game unit, and very cheap at only 475 gold, so a bargain. Your tier 1 cavalry, which a lot of factions don't have access to early game cavalry or low-end cavalry, but you have the Konitsa. These are a light cavalry unit armed with spears, relatively low armor, but nothing much to say about them, to be honest. They're very quick, very cheap, and quite reliable for what you're paying for them. But again, you really get what you pay for with this cavalry unit. You only get your better cavalry units as you go up the ladder and go up the price range. Your basic horse archer unit are the herders. Again, as a cavalry sort of specialist factions, you're one of the few factions that have access to horse archers at all, and you're one of, at least currently only one, that has access to cheap early game horse archers. So the herders are very, very proficient. Very low armor at 5, very low melee defense, but they do have an axe in melee, so they can do some damage when they're closing in for melee combat. Looking at your tier 2, we have the Dragon Slayers. Dragon Slayers are long-range longbowmen. Their damage is 48, so they're very high armor-piercing damage. If you look here, 9 armor-piercing damage, a reload of 15, 30 armor, 200 range, 20 accuracy, just a very, very proficient archer, costing about 950 gold, I believe. So just an extremely good, probably the best, arguably the best human archer in the mod. So just a very, very good archer unit. Moving on, you have your best and final unit of infantry. Not even just spear infantry, but just infantry in general. You don't have melee or shock or pole arms as a Rhovanion. You're very focused on cavalry, and your spear units are sort of line holders. And you've got the Gridmen here. And the Gridmen are an extremely good line holding unit. 50 armor, 40 missile block chance with their round shields, which goes up to about 60 or 65 in shield wall. Just an extremely tanky unit of spears, but not particularly good at the damage, dealing damage. That job is going to be left up to your cavalry. These units are there to hold line, to act as the anvil to the mighty hammer that are your horsemen. Moving on to your tier 2 cavalry, you have the Velmoje. Velmoje, which basically means like noblemen in multiple Slavic languages. They're armed with javelins and they're armed with spears. So they have an anti-cavalry bonus like your tier 1 cavalry, but they have access to those javelins that they throw in, which just ups the damage significantly. The armor is quite decent at 30. Just a very solid unit of cavalry, and very easy to mass up because I believe they only cost 850 or 900 gold. So just a very, very nasty unit of mid-game cavalry, and one that will be very common in your armies in multiplayer. And you have the Outriders. This is your final non-general's bodyguard horse archer unit. They're armed with a spear, like the Prince's Druzhina. They don't have a shield. They're armed with a composite bow, so their damage is increased compared to the herders. Just a very solid mid-game horse archer. Not something you would necessarily want to use the money on if your opponent doesn't have a lot of cavalry, however, because the spear is really only going to be helpful against other units of cavalry. It's not going to be very effective against infantry, or at least no more effective than, say, the one-handed axe that the herders are armed with. So a situational unit, something you're not necessarily going to bring for every battle, but you're going to bring this against other people playing as Rhovanion, or other people playing as some of the other cavalry-heavy factions that will be added in as time goes on. So, Outriders. Going to your tier 3, you have your final tier of foot archers, the Huskarler. Huskarls are armed with a one-handed axe. They're armed with a shield. The Dragon Slayers, by the way, are also armed with a one-handed axe. You have good armor at 45. You have an Eastern composite bow, so your range is actually shorter, and your damage is inferior to the Dragon Slayers. However, you do have a faster reload. That's a feature of sort of composite bows that I gave them, is that their reload rate is significantly faster than other archers. So this is a unit that is excellent at skirmishing, with other enemy archers. This is very good at trading with that, and then once they run out of ammo, they're reasonably proficient sort of hybrid infantry after the fact. So just a very solid unit, similar to what is it? The Helmingas in DAC and Third Age Reforged and Third Age, and I believe they call them something else in Hornburg Garrison, I believe, in the Dauntless Days. So a similar unit to that, very similar in terms of as well. You have the Druzhina. Druzhina are armed with javelins, spears, and shields, obviously. 50 armor, just a very solid unit of an elite melee cavalry. This is probably the best anti-cavalry unit in the entire mod. Just an extremely good unit of heavy cavalry. You will wipe out the enemy cavalry host with these guys, and then they can cycle charge the backs of enemy infantry, where they'll do additional damage. Even though they're not shot cavalry, they can be quite reliable. Once you've wiped out the enemy cav, you can just roam around the battlefield killing everything. So just a very good unit. And you have the Bogatieri. Bogatieri are your final cavalry unit, 1,500. Very expensive. They are a javelin cavalry unit. They're armed with a one-handed sword in melee, and they do it for aesthetic reasons. They have an axe as a quote-unquote shield, though they don't have a shield missile block chance at all. They can go berserk, and they also frighten nearby units, so just an extremely powerful unit of cavalry. I believe their charge bonus is 80, so just a very nasty unit, sort of a hybrid unit, almost like an anti-infantry cavalry unit, but it's not shot cav, it's got javelins, it's just a very, very nasty unit. 55 armor, it's your most heavily armored cavalry unit aside from your general. So in summary, Rhovanion is an extremely cavalry-focused faction, very focused on great archers. Your infantry is not very good, but just a very solid faction, and I will be uploading probably some replays showing them off in battle, showing how you play them, how you skirmish, how you kite. Just an extremely fun faction to play. You definitely have to do a little bit of outside-the-box thinking with them, considering the poor infantry. You will not be able to play them like a typical Dauntless Days faction, but just something that is very rewarding to play, very fun. Whether you're using all cavalry armies, whether you're using archer-heavy armies, or even infantry-heavy armies with some cavalry to support. It's a very, very fun faction to play, and I highly recommend them. See you next time.